I'm Eva, 32, a woman, and I was left broken and alone by my siblings after a life-altering crash, so I masterminded a quiet revenge by becoming more successful than they could ever imagine and shutting the door on them forever. It wasn't a revenge born of malice, not the kind you see in movies with dramatic explosions and public takedowns. Mine was a silent, patient construction, built brick by brick in the lonely hours of the night while they slept soundly, having long since forgotten the sister they decided was too much trouble. My revenge was the life I built from the ashes of the one they left behind. To understand how I could be so thoroughly erased by my own blood, you have to understand the ecosystem of our family. We were a trio of siblings orbiting our parents, but we were never a unit of three. It was always a system of two against one, and the one was almost always me. My older brother, Mark, was the sun of our little family solar system. He was 4 years my senior, born with a confidence that the world owed him its attention. Our parents saw him as their greatest achievement, handsome, athletic, and effortlessly popular. He could do no wrong, and even when he did, his mistakes were reframed as charming misadventures. Our younger sister, Chloe, was born 3 years after me. She arrived to a family that already had its golden boy, so she quickly learned that the path of least resistance was to become Mark's most ardent supporter. She was his shadow, his echo, his cheerleader. Anything Mark liked, Chloe loved. Any opinion Mark held, Chloe championed as gospel. Her identity was so intertwined with his that it was hard to know where he ended and she began. And then there was me, Eva, the quiet, observational middle child. I wasn't as dazzling as Mark or as bubbly as Chloe. I was the one with my nose in a book, the one who preferred sketching in a notebook to being the center of attention at a party. My parents loved me, I suppose, in the way one loves a practical, reliable piece of furniture. I was just there, dependable, quiet, and easily overlooked. This dynamic wasn't a secret, it was the bedrock of our childhood. I remember one summer when I was about 10, I spent a month meticulously building a complex model of a castle from a kit I'd saved up my allowance to buy. It had hundreds of tiny pieces, intricate towers, and a working drawbridge. I was immensely proud of it. The day I finished, I placed it on the coffee table to show our parents when they got home. Mark, then 14, came home first with a friend. They were horsing around, tossing a football in the living room despite being told 100 times not to. The inevitable happened. The football went wide, sailed through the air, and smashed directly into my castle, shattering it into a dozen large pieces and sending hundreds of tiny ones scattering across the rug. I didn't scream, I just felt this cold, heavy weight in my stomach. When Mark saw my face, he just shrugged. "It's just a toy, Eva. Relax." Chloe, who had watched the whole thing, immediately jumped in. "Yeah, Eva, it was an accident, don't be such a tattletale." When our parents got home, the story had already been spun. It was a simple accident, and I was being overly dramatic about it. I was told to clean up the mess, and that my overreaction was more disruptive than the accident itself. No one helped me look for the pieces. I spent the evening on my hands and knees, my heart aching with a feeling I didn't have a name for then, but now I know was injustice. Years later, when I was 16, the dynamic had solidified into a painful routine. I had developed a passion for science and had been working tirelessly on a project for the state science fair. It was an environmental study on the local river's water quality. I had collected samples for months, run tests, and compiled the data into a detailed report and display. The night before the fair, I had it all laid out in the garage, ready to be transported to the school the next morning. Mark, now 20, was having a party. He'd been told to keep it in the house and the backyard, but of course, the party spilled over. Someone, in their infinite wisdom, decided to open a can of spray paint to graffiti a skateboard right next to my project. A gust of wind blew a fine mist of blue paint all over my pristine white display board, ruining half of my charts and graphs. When I discovered it, I was devastated. I ran into the house, holding back tears, and confronted Mark. He was standing in a circle of his friends, holding a cup. He looked at me with bored annoyance. "What do you want me to do about it?" he said, loud enough for his friends to hear. "It's just some paint. Scrape it off. Chloe, ever his defender, chimed in from the side. Oh my gosh, Eva, you're going to ruin Mark's party over this? It's not a big deal. The sting of humiliation was worse than the ruined project. My hard work, my passion, was dismissed as an inconvenience to my brother's social life. My parents, when they found out the next day, sighed with exasperation. They were more concerned with the mess in the garage than with my destroyed project. Mark received a lecture so mild it was practically a suggestion, and I was left to salvage what I could. I ended up getting an honorable mention, but I always wondered what could have been. The final exhibit of our family's dysfunction came just a few months before my crash. I was 22, had just graduated from college with a degree in computer science, and was proud of my accomplishment. Our parents threw a graduation party for me. At least, that's what the invitation said. In reality, Mark had just received a promotion to a junior manager at his sales firm. He arrived at my party, an hour late, and immediately became the center of attention. Our father clapped him on the back, our mother beamed, and the conversation for the rest of the evening revolved around Mark's brilliant career trajectory. My 4 years of late-night study sessions, complex coding projects, and academic stress were reduced to a footnote. Chloe flitted around him, fetching him drinks and telling everyone, "Isn't he amazing?" At one point, our aunt turned to me and said, "It's so wonderful that you're done with school, dear. Now you can focus on finding a nice young man and settling down, just like your brother is on his way to doing." I just smiled a tight, empty smile. I had accomplished something significant, yet in my own family, I was still just the supporting act. I was the reliable furniture, there to make the room feel complete while the real stars shone. I didn't resent their success. I resented my invisibility. I resented being treated like a placeholder in my own life story. I had no idea then that this casual, systemic disregard was just a dress rehearsal. I didn't know that my family was about to be tested in a way that had nothing to do with toy castles or science fairs, and that I was about to learn the true, devastating cost of being the one they had already decided they could live without. The crash happened on a Tuesday in October. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the autumn leaves were a riot of red and gold. It was a beautiful day for a tragedy. I was driving home from a job interview, a promising one at a small but innovative software company. I was feeling hopeful, humming along to the radio. I was stopped at a red light, fourth or fifth car in the line, my mind already racing with ideas for the coding test they'd asked me to complete. That's the last clear thing I remember before the world became a symphony of screeching tires, shattering glass, and the violent, wrenching groan of metal. A truck, whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, had plowed through the intersection without braking. It hit a car that was then thrown into another, creating a brutal chain reaction that ended with my small sedan, which was crushed from behind by the vehicle that had been behind me. The force was immense. My world didn't just go black. It exploded into a universe of blinding white pain, and then, mercifully, nothing. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. A soft, hazy light filtered through my eyelids. When I managed to pry them open, the first thing I saw was the concerned face of a nurse. The second thing I saw was the complex architecture of metal bars and pulleys surrounding my left leg. I had a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and my leg was shattered in multiple places. The doctors used words like extensive surgery, long-term rehabilitation, and uncertain prognosis. I was 22 years old, and my life, as I knew it, had been obliterated in an instant. My parents were distraught, of course. They rushed to the hospital, their faces etched with worry. But in the background, I could already see the old dynamics clicking into place. Mark and Chloe arrived later that first day. Mark stood at the foot of my bed, his hands in the pockets of his tailored trousers, looking less at me and more at the medical equipment, as if he were assessing a piece of faulty machinery. "Wow, Eva, you really did a number on yourself," he said, a statement so devoid of empathy it felt like a slap. Chloe hovered near the door, her phone clutched in her hand. "This is just awful," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I had to cancel my salon appointment." In those first few days, they played their roles. They brought flowers that clashed with the grim reality of the room. They brought magazines I couldn't focus on. But their visits grew shorter, more perfunctory. Their concern was quickly overshadowed by the sheer inconvenience of it all. My recovery was not going to be a quick, tidy affair. It was going to be a long, messy, and demanding slog, and they had busy lives. Mark was in the middle of a big sales quarter. "I'd love to stay longer, Eva B." You know how it is," he'd say, already backing toward the door. "This deal is huge. The pressure is on." He spoke of his pressure as if it were a weight far heavier than the traction holding my bones together. Chloe's excuses were more trivial but delivered with the same air of importance. She had a brunch she couldn't miss, a social media collaboration that required her to be in a specific place at a specific time, a friend's party she had promised to attend. "I'll try to come by tomorrow," she'd promise, but tomorrow often came and went without a sign of her. The turning point, the moment the casual neglect hardened into deliberate abandonment, came about 2 weeks in. The doctors told me I was stable enough to be moved from the hospital to a dedicated physical rehabilitation facility. The journey ahead was daunting. Months, possibly a year or more, of intensive therapy to learn how to walk again. My parents, who were nearing retirement and had their own health to consider, were overwhelmed. They decided to return home, a few hours away, promising to visit every weekend. It was during a family discussion about the logistics of this new reality that the true colors were shown. We were in my hospital room. My father was looking at a brochure for the rehab center, his brow furrowed with worry over the cost. My mother was wringing her hands. Mark was pacing. "Look, this is obviously a long-term thing," he said, stopping to face us. "I have my job. I can't be driving back and forth all the time. My boss is already starting to ask questions about my family issues." I looked at him from my bed, a dull ache spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with my injuries. "Mark, I can't do this alone." "You won't be alone," Chloe chimed in, too quickly. "You'll have nurses and doctors." She looked at Mark for approval, and he gave her a slight nod. "We can't just put our lives on hold, Eva. That's not fair to us." Not fair to us. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I had been in a catastrophic accident, my body was broken, my future was terrifyingly uncertain, and their primary concern was fairness. To them. "I'm not asking you to put your lives on hold," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm just asking you to be here, sometimes." Mark let out an exasperated sigh, the same one he'd used when I'd complained about my ruined science project. "Eva, let's be realistic. You're going to be in that place for a long time. What do you expect us to do? Sit here and hold your hand every day? We have responsibilities. I'm trying to build a career. Chloe is trying to get her life started. This is a major setback for everyone." A setback for everyone. The way he said it made it clear that he saw my tragedy not as something that had happened to me, but as something I had somehow inflicted on the family. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. I looked at Chloe, my younger sister, hoping for a flicker of solidarity, a sign of protest. But she just stared at her shoes, silent. Her silence was her consent. She was siding with him, as she always had. In that moment, they weren't my brother and sister. They were a unified front, and I was the problem they needed to manage. After that day, the pretense fell away completely. Their calls became infrequent. Their visits stopped. My parents tried, visiting on weekends as promised, but their visits were strained, filled with their worries and reports on Mark's latest success or Chloe's social life. My siblings were ghosts. They sent a generic get-well-soon card to the rehab facility. It was signed by both of them, two neat, untroubled signatures at the bottom of a soulless, mass-produced sentiment. That was it. I was left alone in a world of sterile white walls, the smell of rubbing alcohol, and the relentless, grinding pain of recovery. I was surrounded by strangers, nurses, therapists, other broken people, but I had never felt so profoundly, terrifyingly alone. The physical pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the agony of being discarded by the two people who were supposed to be my closest allies. They hadn't just failed to show up. They had made a conscious decision that my brokenness was not worth their time. They had looked at my shattered life and walked away. And in the echoing silence of their absence, a new, cold resolve began to form. The rehabilitation facility was a place where time was measured in millimeters of progress. Each day was a monotonous loop of pain, effort, and frustration. My lowest point came about 2 months into my stay. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the grim, soul-crushing reality of my situation. The phantom limb of my old life ached more than my healing bones. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, and the silence would amplify the sound of their abandonment until it was a deafening roar in my ears. I had tried calling them in. A moment of weakness, I had dialed Mark's number. It went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice cracking, just saying I was having a hard day and wanted to hear his voice. He never called back. A few days later, I received a short text message. "Heard you called. Super swamped at work. Keep your chin up. We're all rooting for you." It was so dismissive, so corporate and impersonal, it felt worse than no reply at all. He wasn't rooting for me, he was placating a nuisance. The physical therapy sessions were brutal. My new therapist was a man named David. He was a few years older than me, with kind eyes and an attitude that was a firm, no-nonsense blend of compassion and command. He didn't coddle me. He saw the flicker of despair in my eyes and refused to let it become a fire. "Come on, Eva," he'd say, his voice steady as he supported my weight while I tried to take a single, agonizing step with the walker. "The bone is healing. The muscles remember. It's your mind that's giving up. Don't let it." One afternoon, I simply couldn't do it. My leg felt like it was filled with hot lead and broken glass. Every tiny movement sent a jolt of pain up my spine. Tears of pure frustration and exhaustion streamed down my face. "I can't," I choked out, slumping against the parallel bars. "I can't do this anymore. What's the point? They're gone. Everyone is gone." Instead of offering a platitude, David just waited a moment, letting me cry. Then he pulled up a stool and sat in front of me. "Who's gone?" he asked quietly. "My brother, my sister," I mumbled into my hands. "They don't care. They think I'm a burden. They just left me here." David was silent for a long moment. I expected him to say something like, "I'm sure they're just busy." But he didn't. He said, "Okay, so they left. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to lie down and prove them right? Are you going to let them be the authors of your story, or are you going to pick up the pen and write your own ending?" His words cut through the fog of my self-pity. It was the first time someone had framed my situation not as a tragedy, but as a choice. A choice between being a victim and being a survivor. He wasn't just my physical therapist anymore. He was the first person since the crash to speak to me, the person trapped inside the broken body. That conversation was the turning point. David became my ally, my confidant, my only friend. He would stay late after his shift to talk, bringing me coffee from the good cafe down the street. He told me about his own struggles, about a younger brother he had helped through a tough time. He treated me like a whole person, not just a collection of injuries. He saw my potential, even when I couldn't. It was during one of these late-night talks that the spark ignited. I was complaining about the tediousness of my therapy exercises, specifically the small, repetitive movements I had to do in my room, unsupervised. "I'm supposed to do these 3 times a day," I explained, gesturing to a photocopied sheet of stick figure diagrams. "But it's so boring and I have no idea if I'm even doing them right. There's no feedback. It feels pointless." David nodded. "It's a common problem. Adherence to at-home exercises is the single biggest variable in long-term recovery. People lose motivation. They don't have guidance." And then it hit me, a thought so clear and bright it was like a lighthouse beam in the fog. My mind, the part of me that wasn't broken, the part that knew code and logic and user interfaces, suddenly lit up. "What if there was an app for that?" I said, the words tumbling out. "An app that could use the phone's camera and sensors to guide you through the exercises. It could provide real-time feedback on your form, track your reps, show your progress over time. It could gamify it, give you points or awards for consistency." It could connect you with your therapist so they could monitor your progress remotely. David stopped stirring his coffee. He looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. Eva, that's a brilliant idea. Is it? I asked, my heart starting to beat faster with an excitement I hadn't felt in months. I mean, the technology is there. Motion tracking is getting better and better. It's more than brilliant, he said, his voice full of genuine enthusiasm. It's needed. It could help thousands of people. That night, for the first time since the crash, I didn't lie awake thinking about Mark and Chloe. I lay awake with my mind racing, sketching out user flows and feature sets in my head. A purpose. I had a purpose again. It was small, just the seed of an idea, but it was mine. It was something I could build, something that had nothing to do with my broken body and everything to do with my resilient mind. The next day, I asked David to bring me a laptop. It was an old one of his, slow and clunky, but it was a lifeline, while my body was trapped in the slow, arduous process of heal. My mind was suddenly free. I started coding. I began designing. Every painful step I took in physical therapy, I channeled that frustration into a line of code. Every time a wave of loneliness washed over me, I fought it back by solving a complex programming problem. My quiet revenge had begun to take shape. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about healing myself on my own terms. It was about building a future so bright it would cast a shadow over their petty excuses and fair-weather love. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with a powerful, all-consuming motivation to prove that the person they had written off was more capable, more resilient, and more valuable than they could ever possibly imagine. The broken girl in the rehab facility was starting to build her own world, one line of code at a time. The next 3 years were a blur of two parallel realities. In one, I was the patient, painstakingly rebuilding my physical self. In the other, I was the architect, building a digital future from scratch. The two were inextricably linked. The discipline I learned in physical therapy, the grit to push through pain for an inch of progress, became the same discipline I applied to my work. After nearly a year, I was finally discharged from the rehab facility. I could walk, albeit with a pronounced limp and the constant companionship of a cane on bad days. My parents helped me get set up in a small, ground-floor apartment. It was all they could do, and I was grateful for it, but the emotional chasm between us remained. Their conversations were still filled with news of Mark's latest bonus and Chloe's newest, most exciting social circle. They saw my limp and my cane as symbols of my tragedy. They never once asked about the laptop that was always open on my small kitchen table. They couldn't see that my real recovery was happening on that screen. My days fell into a grueling routine. Mornings were for my body, stretching, exercises, and slow, careful walks around the block to build my stamina. Afternoons and evenings were for my mind. I lived and breathed code. I taught myself new programming languages, studied app development, and delved into the world of user experience design. My apartment was a cocoon of concentration. Post-it notes with code snippets and design ideas covered the walls. Stacks of technical books served as coasters. I was a hermit, but a purposeful one. David remained my anchor. He had been there when I took my first unassisted step, and he was there when I compiled my first working prototype of the app. He became my first and only beta tester. He would use it with some of his other patients, with their permission, of course, and give me invaluable feedback from a professional's perspective. The angle detection is a little off on the leg lifts, he'd tell me, or this progress chart is amazing, so motivating. He was my partner in every sense, but the official one. Contact with my siblings was virtually non-existent. The silence from their end was absolute. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment I was no longer a fresh crisis. I learned later, through a well-meaning cousin, that they had crafted a neat little narrative for the rest of the family. Eva's going through a tough time, they'd say with performative sadness. She's very withdrawn. She just doesn't want to see anyone. They had managed to paint my isolation, an isolation they had created, as my own choice. They made me the villain of my own story so they could sleep at night. The only communication I received was a single Christmas card that first year I was in my apartment. It was a glossy photo card featuring a grinning Mark and Chloe standing arm in arm in front of a Christmas tree. On the back, in Chloe's loopy handwriting, was a short, infuriatingly cheerful note. "Merry Christmas, Eva. Thinking of you, hope you're feeling better. Love, Chloe and Mark." There was no phone call, no offer to visit, no question about how I was actually doing. Just a photo of their perfect, unbroken lives and a hollow sentiment. "Thinking of you." The words felt like a mockery. They weren't thinking of me, they were checking a box on their holiday to-do list. I threw the card in the trash. That was the day I stopped waiting for them to care. My project, which I had named Phoenix, became my entire world. It was an apt name. I thought something new and powerful rising from the ashes. I poured all the money I had from the accident settlement into it. It wasn't much, but I was frugal. I ate instant noodles and cheap frozen vegetables. My only luxuries were a good internet connection and coffee. I was running on caffeine and pure, unadulterated determination. There were so many moments of doubt. Nights when a bug in the code seemed impossible to fix, when I would stare at the screen until the letters blurred together, feeling the crushing weight of my ambition. I was a lone woman with a limp TR. Ying to break into the hyper-competitive, male-dominated world of tech. Who was I to think I could succeed? In those moments, I would close my eyes and picture Mark's dismissive face, hear Chloe's hollow words. I would remember the silence, the abandonment. And the anger, cold and clean, would fuel me. It was better than caffeine. David was the one who kept me from burning out. He'd show up at my door with takeout and refuse to leave until I had eaten a real meal and talked about something other than code. "You built this," he said one evening, gesturing to the complex program running on my monitor. "From nothing, in this tiny apartment, while your body was still at war with itself. Do you have any idea how incredible that is?" I just shrugged, unable to see it myself. "It's not done yet." "It's amazing," he insisted, his gaze soft. "You're amazing, Eva." His belief in me was a shield against my own self-doubt. The quiet grind continued for 2 more years. It was a lonely, thankless, and invisible labor. To the outside world, and certainly to my family, I was just Eva, the poor, unfortunate girl who had a bad accident. I was living in a small apartment, not doing much of anything. They had no idea that I was building an empire from my kitchen table. They had no idea that while they were climbing their conventional ladders of success, I was building my own ladder to the sky. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday, almost 4 years to the day after the crash. It didn't arrive with a thunderclap, but with the quiet ping of an email notification. For months, I had been submitting Phoenix to tech startup competitions and sending it to venture capital firms. The responses were a steady stream of rejections. "Interesting concept, but the market is too niche. The founder has no business background. We're looking for teams, not solo founders." Each rejection was a small sting, but I had developed a thick skin. I would read the email, archive it, and get back to work. But this email was different. It was from a well-respected, women-led venture capital firm known for investing in health tech. The subject line was simple: "Regarding your Phoenix proposal." My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked it open, my hand trembling slightly. The email was short and to the point. They were impressed with the prototype. They saw the market potential. They wanted to schedule a meeting. A meeting? They wanted to meet with me. For the first time in years, I let out a yell of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a raw, primal sound that seemed to shake the very walls of my small apartment. I jumped up from my chair, forgetting my cane, and my leg buckled slightly, reminding me of my physical limits. But I didn't care. I just laughed, leaning against the table for support. The first person I called was David. "They want a meeting," I shouted into the phone before he could even say hello. "Vanguard Capital, they want to talk about Phoenix." I could hear the smile in his voice. "I knew it, Eva, I knew it, this is it." The 2 weeks leading up to the presentation were the most intense of my life. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and nervous energy. David helped me prepare, acting as a mock panel, grilling me with tough questions about financials, market strategy, and scalability. He helped me pick out an outfit, a simple, professional dark blue dress. "No cane," I told him fiercely. "I'm not walking in there looking broken." I practiced walking without it until my leg ached, determined to present an image of pure strength and competence. The day of the meeting, I stood before a board of 4 powerful, intelligent women. I was terrified, but I channeled that fear into focus. I told them my story, not the self-pitying version, but the story of the problem I had identified and the solution I had built. I spoke about the patient's journey, the frustration, the need for motivation and connection. My personal history wasn't a liability, it was my expertise. I knew my user base because I was my user base. When I finished my presentation and demo, the room was silent. Then, the lead partner, a sharp woman named Alina, leaned forward. "Ms. Eva," she began, her eyes piercing but not unkind, "what you've built is impressive. But what's more impressive is you. We don't just invest in ideas, we invest in founders. And you are one of the most resilient founders I have ever met." They offered me a seed funding deal that made me gasp. It was a number with so many zeros it seemed unreal. It was enough to hire a small team, lease a real office, and scale Phoenix beyond my wildest dreams. I accepted on the spot, my voice steady despite the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. I walked out of that building into the bright afternoon sun, feeling like I was floating. I had done it. My quiet, solitary grind had paid off. That night, David took me out to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. It was the first time in years been anywhere that required a reservation. "To Phoenix," he said, raising his glass. "To Phoenix," I echoed, my eyes shining. "And to you, David, I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," he said simply. "It just would have been a lot less fun." The success changed everything, and yet, on a personal level, it changed nothing. I moved into a nicer apartment, one with a second bedroom that I turned into a home office. I hired my first 2 employees, both brilliant young developers who were passionate about the mission. I was a CEO now. I had meetings and responsibilities and a payroll to manage. But my family remained a silent, empty space in my life. They had no idea. My success wasn't on the front page of the newspaper. It was in tech journals and industry press releases that they would never read. As far as they knew, I was still just their broken little sister, living off a meager settlement in a small apartment. One evening, sitting in my new, spacious living room, looking out over the city lights, a strange feeling washed over me. It was a mix of immense pride and a deep, hollow ache. I had achieved this incredible thing, a victory I had clawed my way toward for years, and there was no one in my family to tell. It was a lonely summit. For a fleeting moment, I felt the old urge to call them, to say, "Look at me, you were wrong." But I crushed the impulse. This victory was mine. It was forged in their absence. Sharing it with them now would be like inviting a storm to a garden I had so carefully cultivated in silence. They didn't deserve to stand in its shade. My success wasn't a trophy to show them, it was the wall I had built to keep them out, and it was getting higher every single day. Another 3 years passed. Phoenix was no longer just an app, it was a platform. We had expanded our services, partnering with hospitals and physical therapy chains across the country. Our company, Phoenix Health Tech, had grown to over 50 employees. We had a sleek, modern office downtown. I was no longer just a CEO, I was a recognized figure in the health tech industry. I had been featured in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences. The girl with the limp and the clunky laptop was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded boardrooms and inspired her team. My limp was still there, a quiet reminder of my origins, but now I saw it not as a weakness, but as a part of the story, a testament to the journey. David had long since left his job at the facility and joined Phoenix as the head of clinical integration, his expertise proving invaluable. Our friendship had deepened into a quiet, steady partnership that was the foundation of my new life. I knew the day would come. In a world this connected, a secret of my magnitude couldn't be kept forever. Success, especially on this scale, creates ripples, and eventually, those ripples were bound to reach the shore of my former life. The first ripple was a Facebook message from a distant cousin. "OMG Eva, is this you?" she wrote, with a link to a 30 under 30 style article about innovators in technology. There was a professional headshot of me, smiling and confident. The article detailed the story of Phoenix, framing my accident as the catalyst for innovation. I replied with a simple, "Yes, that's me. Hope you're well." I knew the news would spread through the family grapevine from there. It took 2 weeks. I was in a meeting, reviewing our quarterly growth charts when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart gave a familiar lurch. The message was just 3 words. "Eva, it's Chloe." I stared at the screen, the noise of the meeting fading into a dull hum. After 6 years of almost total silence, there it was. Her name on my phone. I didn't reply. An hour later, the same number called. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was breathless and flustered. "Eva, hi, it's me, Chloe. Wow, I saw this article. About you, I can't believe it. It's amazing. We should talk. I'd love to hear all about it. Call me." Her voice was different. The old, breezy confidence was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost nervous tone. She sounded like someone trying to approach a wild animal they weren't sure would bite. The main event came the next day, a call from Mark. I was in my office, looking out at the city when his name flashed on the screen. I had never deleted his number. I wanted the reminder. I let out a long, slow breath and answered, keeping my voice cool and neutral. "Hello." Eva, is that you?" His voice was loud, booming with a forced, jovial energy that set my teeth on edge. "Yes, Mark, it's me." Wow, I heard from Chloe and I had to see it for myself. I looked you up. CEO, Eva, that's incredible. I mean, I always knew you had it in you. The lie was so bald, so audacious, it was almost impressive. I always knew you had it in you. This, from the man who had dismissed my life's work as a setback for everyone. This, from the man who couldn't be bothered to return a phone call when I was at my lowest point. "Did you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He either missed the sarcasm or chose to ignore it. "Of course, you were always the smart one. A little quiet, but a real brain. We are so proud of you. Mom and Dad are just over the moon. We have to celebrate. We need to get together, all of us. It's been way too long." It's been way too long. He said it as if it were a shared oversight, a simple case of busy lives getting in the way, not a deliberate 6-year abandonment. He spoke as if he could just snap his fingers and erase the past, reboot our relationship now that I was no longer a liability, but an asset. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, my curiosity morbid. I wanted to see how far he would take this. "Well, Chloe and I were thinking we could come to you, see your new life, take you out for a fancy dinner to celebrate. No expense spared, we want to hear everything." He wanted a tour. He wanted an audience with the new, successful me. A cold, calm resolve settled over me. This was the moment. This was the final chapter I had been subconsciously preparing for. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. I needed to do this, not for them, but to close the door myself with my own hand and lock it from my side. "All right, Mark," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "You can come. How about next Saturday?" I gave them the address of a restaurant. A very nice, very public place near my office. A neutral ground. He was ecstatic, promising to make the reservation himself, gushing about how great it would be to finally catch up. After I hung up, David came into my office. He must have seen it on my face. "Was that them?" he asked gently. I nodded. "They've seen the articles. They want to celebrate." His expression hardened slightly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," I said, turning to face him. "I'm not the same person they left in that hospital, David. It's time they found that out." He took my hand, his grip firm and steady. "I'll be there if you need me," he said. I knew he would be, but this was a walk I had to take alone. I arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. I chose a table in a quiet corner, one with a clear view of the entrance. I sat there, nursing a glass of water, feeling a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the nervous girl seeking their approval anymore. I was a woman meeting with potential business partners whose pitch I already knew I was going to reject. They arrived 10 minutes late, bustling in with an air of theatrical importance. Mark was wearing a suit that was just a little too shiny, trying too hard. Chloe was dressed in the latest trendy fashion, her eyes scanning the upscale restaurant with a practiced air of someone who belonged, but her nervous fidgeting gave her away. When they saw me, their faces lit up with wide, artificial smiles. Mark rushed forward to give me an awkward, one-armed hug. "Eva, you look fantastic. Success suits you," Chloe followed, her hug even more tentative. "It's so good to see you," she breathed. They sat down and the performance began. For the first 20 minutes, they gushed. They praised my company, my success, my incredible comeback. They recounted the story from the article as if they had been my biggest supporters all along. "I remember when you first had the idea," Mark lied smoothly. "You were always so brilliant with that computer stuff." I just listened, nodding occasionally, my expression unreadable. I let them talk, let them spin their web of revisionist history. The waiter came and took our orders. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu, along with a pricey bottle of wine, which Mark insisted on putting on his tab with a grand gesture. "Tonight is all about you, sis." The conversation inevitably turned to them. Mark complained about his job, the pressure, the unappreciative bosses. He was a regional manager now, but it was clear his career had plateaued. Chloe spoke vaguely about her projects, a series of failed attempts at being a social media influencer that never quite took off. It was all delivered with a subtext of dissatisfaction, a stark contrast to the glowing success story they saw sitting across from them. Finally, the moment came. After the main course was cleared, Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more serious, confidential tone. "So, Eva," he began, "obviously you're doing incredibly well, and we're so proud. The thing is, Chloe and we've been talking. I've got this great idea for a side business, a consulting firm, but you know how it is, getting started is tough. The capital." Chloe picked up the thread seamlessly. "And my art gallery work is fine, but it doesn't pay much. I've always wanted to open my own little boutique, if I just had a little help getting it off the ground." There it was, the reason for the dinner, for the gushing praise, for the sudden, miraculous return to my life. They didn't just want to celebrate my success. They wanted a piece of it. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I took a slow sip of water, then placed the glass down gently. I looked at Mark. Then I looked at Chloe. And for the first time that evening, I really spoke. "I remember lying in a hospital bed for 2 weeks. I said, my voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight that made them both sit up straighter. "And I remember you, Mark, standing at the foot of that bed, telling me my accident was a setback for everyone. I remember you complaining about your sales quarter." Mark's smile faltered. He started to speak, but I held up a hand. "And I remember you, Chloe," I continued, turning to my sister. "I remember you saying it wasn't fair to you, that you couldn't put your life on hold. I remember a text message, Mark, telling me to keep my chin up after I called you, crying. And I remember a Christmas card. That was the last I heard from either of you for 6 years." The color drained from their faces. The jovial atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. "Eva, we were young," Mark stammered. "We didn't know how to handle it. We were scared." "I was the one who was scared," I said, my voice remaining level, devoid of the hysteria they might have expected. "I was 22 years old and I was learning how to use my own legs again. I was alone. You weren't scared. You were inconvenienced. You made a calculated decision that I was too much work and you wrote me off." "That's not true," Chloe whispered, her eyes welling with tears. But they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. "Isn't it?" I pressed. "The company you're so proud of, Phoenix, was built in a tiny, ground-floor apartment while I was living on a settlement check because I couldn't work a normal job. It was funded by noodles and coffee, and the fury I felt every time I thought of you both living your lives as if I had never existed. My success isn't something that happened in spite of you. It happened because of you. Your absence was the quiet, empty space I had to fill with work, with ambition, with a reason to get up every day. You gave me the fuel, so, in a way, I suppose I should thank you. I opened my purse and took out my wallet. I placed a few large bills on the table, more than enough to cover my meal. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind only scar tissue. I forgive you because I have to for my own peace. But forgiving you and letting you back into my life are two very different things. The life I have now, the one you're so impressed by, was built without you. It will continue without you. I stood up, my movement steady and sure. I didn't need a cane. My door is now closed to you, not out of anger but out of self-preservation. I wish you both the best. Goodbye. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't see their expressions, and I didn't care to. As I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumph or the satisfaction of revenge. I felt light. The final thread had been cut. The last chapter of that old story was written. I walked the few blocks to my office building, took the elevator to the top floor, and found David waiting for me, just as he said he would be. He didn't ask how it went. He just saw the look on my face and held out his hand. I took it, and we stood there for a long time, looking out at the glittering city lights, the lights of the world I had built for myself. I was not broken. I was not alone. I was home. So I leave it to you. After being abandoned and left to fend for yourself, would you have opened the door when they came knocking? Or would you have done what I did, and realized that some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way forever?